Last week, Pastor Andrew preached from 1 Timothy, and obviously, as the preacher does, was preaching to the church congregation. But if you were here last week, you'll remember most all of his points were also directed towards me. And sitting there, man, I have never heard my name mentioned so many times during a sermon. And I thought in that moment, man, this is what it must be like for people whose names are like John or Paul or James or something like that. I mention that because this morning we are starting a study through the book of Ruth. Do we have any Ruths this morning? Just the one? Okay, cool. So yeah, we've had a few Ruths over the years at this church, so cool. So Ruth, you might, next 4 or 5 weeks, you might feel a little called out. But hey, so the reason we're teaching through Ruth for the next few weeks is because if you recall, when at the end of last year, Pastor Andrew took us through a series through the judges, and each week we looked at a particular judge, and kind of studied their life and and all of that. And as the transition happened to new senior leadership, you'll recall if you were around then, I said, hey, you know what we're going to do? Yeah, there's a new senior leader, but we're just going to continue teaching through the book of Judges and teach on all, the last few chapters where it gets really hairy with like murder and rape and bodies chopped up and kidnapping and all of that kind of stuff. So let's just continue to teach through that because, yeah, there's new leadership, but we're still committed to just preaching God's word. And then so we finished that through January, and then we had these kind of, different services like last week and whatnot. And as I thought about, okay, we need to settle down, we need to get into a book and just carry on. And I thought, once you preach through Judges, you kind of have to preach through Ruth because there's a logical progression from Judges to Ruth. And in fact, what we're going to see this morning is that the story about Ruth is actually set during the time of the Judges. So that's why we're going to go through Judges. Now, I'm giving you another sneak peek behind the curtain. We were actually just going to do it for 4 weeks and just hit one chapter per week, and that's cool. But as I studied it and read it, this is one I've studied and preached so many times before, but I just kept going, oh man, there's so much in here. We don't want people to miss anything. So the 4-week series, you're worried. You're like, is this going to be like Revelation again? And we're going to take it over 3 years. It's not going to be 3 years. We've just extended it by one week. It's going to be 5 weeks. And I tell you this because today we're going to do a monumental task. We are going to go through the entire book of Ruth. And the reason for that is because when this was written, it wasn't written. It's not like movies that have come out in bits and pieces. This is one letter. And actually, it's not that long. It's like 80-something verses. And so as we, from next week onwards, kind of hit one chapter at a time and dig down a little bit deeper, I want us to understand the big picture and understand the whole story of Ruth so we can actually hear it like the original audience would have. Not that they read it in English, but we can get a grasp of what's going on. And as we go through the text, I'll make some observations and make some points, and we'll wrap it up with some application at the end. But as we do this, I know, when we do like big Bible readings, there's the tendency where we start thinking about lunch or start thinking about the Auckland FC game yesterday, or our minds start to wander. But yeah, I'll just beg or implore you, like, let's try focus as we go through the text. And what really helps for me is I like to think about it when I read these narratives. I try to think about it like it's a movie, or think about like if I were a fly on the wall or on the camel in that place, and just kind of imagine it kind of happening before my eyes. So we're going to go through Ruth and just read through the text. So if you've got your Bibles, please turn to Ruth. And I've chucked a map up there just so you can kind of see what's happening. So at the end of Judges, actually, yeah, let's go to Judges, turn back one page. Judges ends with this. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so Judges left us with this just kind of like messed up picture of the state of God's people. And I guess the question that's begged from that is, well, is that it? Is this our legacy? We're just left with this. Where is God? What's happening? What's going to happen to God's people? In the book of Ruth is that glimmer of hope. It's the light at the end of the tunnel, per se. It answers that question, where is God amongst all this mess? So let's start in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. Stop there. Didn't get far. So it was a time when the judges ruled. So that means when this is happening, scholars will debate, some people say it kind of happens around Judges 10, but it was during a time of rebellion and relativism. So the time when the judges ruled was a time of relativism. It was where everyone did what was right in their own eyes. As in, you do what's good for you and what you think is right, and I'll do what I think is right. And that's, relativism and rebellion is it's also a time that we live in today. And it doesn't end well. We see that in the book of Judges itself, where everyone does what's right in their own eyes, and it just leads to total chaos, and the people are stuck in this mess, and then they have to call out to God, and he rescues them through a judge, and then it's all as well, and then they start doing what's right in their own eyes again, and that cycle continues. But this is why, in the world today, and actually throughout history, so many of the problems that we see is due down to this idea of relativism being played out. Because if we can all just do what's right in our own eyes, then who are you to tell me that what I do is bad, and who am I to tell you what you do is bad? And with this worldview, we can justify saying some people are not human, and therefore we're allowed to enslave them. Or people from this place or this skin color, we're allowed to kill them because they're not actually human beings. Or you're allowed to murder a child depending on where they are. If they're in the womb, then you're allowed to kill them. Of course, that's fine, right? And so if we don't have an objective standard for what is right and what is wrong, then it leads to that kind of thing. And this is why we need God's word, an external word outside of us. The theologians call that extra nos, outside of us, a word that is not just coming from what I think is good, but actually it's from God. It's external to me and how I'm feeling. And there was a famine in the land. And so we know that this is the time of rebellion, because Deuteronomy 28 is going to tell us, and Leviticus 26 kind of mentions how God had a covenant with Moses and the people. It's called the Mosaic covenant. There's an Abrahamic covenant, there's a Davidic covenant, new covenant. A Mosaic covenant was one of these covenants where it really goes back to the purpose of Israel as a nation, that they were supposed to represent God to the surrounding nations and say, hey, you want to know what Yahweh is like? Come take a look at us. And on that basis, God said, okay, so when you obey me and live out the way that you're supposed to and reflect me correctly, then I'm going to bless you. You're going to have tons of kids. You're going to have lots of grain. You're going to have rain. Things are going to go well for you. But if you disobey, then there are curses or judgments. And so if you disobey, if the people start disobeying God and not reflecting God correctly, then there are curses, there are judgments for that. And famine was one of them. There was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn, which means to just go there for a while, sojourn in the country of Moab. He and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. So Elimelech means my God is king. That's a great name. If anyone, if you're pregnant and you're expecting a boy, Elimelech, that's a good name. His wife is Naomi, which means sweet. And the names of his two sons, oh man. Okay, I promise we're going to go into detail on these things in the coming weeks. But Mahlon and Chilion, their names are hilarious. Their names mean like sick or sickly and crying or pining. So name your kids Elimelech, my God is king, not sick or crybaby. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. So you can see up there, Ephrathah is another word for Bethlehem. They're from the tribe of Judah. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. I found this interesting. They said first they were going to sojourn there, just go there for a bit, and then it says they remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her two sons. These two sons took Moabite wives, and the name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other, Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. So what we've got is this introduction, it's just total chaos. There's a famine. This family decides to go to Moab, which, that's controversial in and of itself. And then they go to Moab, they marry Moabite women, and all the men die. And so here we have these 3 widows left in a very, very patriarchal society. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. So they hear, okay, back in Bethlehem, which, by the way, means house of bread. So it's funny, they live in the house of bread, and there is no bread, and so they go to Moab. But now they hear, actually, the Lord, maybe the people had started repenting, and we're in that cycle of God's, blessing them again, and they hear, okay, there's crops again, let's go back there. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead, as in her kids, and with me. And so it seems like even when their husbands died, they stuck with this lady. Good on them. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and bear sons, even if I have kids now, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter for me. Interesting, her name means sweet, and now she's saying it's bitter for her. It's bitter for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. That word clung, by the way, is the same word cleave, like husband, wife, cleave. But Ruth clung to her. So, they're from Moab, they're living in Moab. Bethlehem seems all good again. Let's go back. And Naomi, she's from there. So she says, it's going to be hard enough for me as a widow, but it's going to be even harder for you guys as widows from a foreign land. So you guys just go back to your own place. And obviously they care about each other because there's a lot of weeping and, Orpah says goodbye, Ruth stays. Verse 15, and she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me and more, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. This is a momentous occasion, momentous thing that is happening right now, because it's conversion. She's saying, your God is going to be my God. I'm going to go with you. I'm willing to live as a foreigner, and never mind just a foreigner, but a Moabite, in a patriarchal society, to be loyal to you and to serve your God together. Verse 19, so the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, is this Naomi? Right, it's been 10 odd years. Is this Naomi? She said to them, don't call me Naomi, don't call me sweet, call me Mara, which means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? Why call me sweet when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. You know when you're watching a movie and it cuts to a random scene and it shows you something and it seems like it has nothing to do with the rest of the film, but you know the director has introduced the character for a reason, and that's what's happening here. Suddenly the narrator, the author, and we don't know quite who wrote this book, decides to mention, oh, by the way, wait for this guy Boaz. We're going to introduce him in a moment. Verse 2, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the heirs of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor. Gleaning, by the way, was a welfare system that God had instituted. Again, I promise we're going to go into detail all this stuff in the coming weeks. Basically, when people did their crops, God's command to them was like, hey, don't wipe everything out, leave some. If you drop some, leave it, so that those who are going without, they can come and glean. They can come and kind of harvest some for themselves as well. So it was a welfare system that God had created in order to take care of widows, foreigners, etc., etc. So Ruth is saying, let me go to the field and let's do some gleaning. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she just happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. And he said to the reapers, so Boaz comes down to visit his field. He said to and behold, verse 4, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, the Lord be with you. Great greeting from the boss, eh? Does your boss or manager at work greet you like that when you walk in? Maybe if you work at Kingsway School or something, And they answered, the Lord bless you. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, whose young woman is this? And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, she is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers. So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young woman. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you're thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then, so he's basically saying to Ruth, hey, stay here. Don't go over next door to Abraham's field. Don't go there. Who knows what might happen? I've told my guys to look after you. Ruth, you stay here. So what we're seeing is Boaz is a good man. He's a good man. Verse 10, she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and she said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me since I'm a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord, Yahweh, repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. That's a great verse. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wing you have come to take refuge. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and I have spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. Now, at mealtime, he said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine, which, by the way, some of your translations might say like vinegar. So it's probably some kind of vinegar that's been fermented and kind of tastes like wine. Probably that's what Jesus had on the cross when they were trying to give him drink. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed her the roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young man, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some of the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So he's saying, like, leave a bit extra for her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned and took it, and it was about an ephah, which is about 22 liters, by the way, of barley. She took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I work today is Boaz. So this is, Ruth, this story of Ruth has often been described as a love story. And what we're seeing here is Boaz, he's seen this lady working in the field, and he's gone, oh, guys, who's that? And we're seeing here, she's going, there's this guy, he's a great man, he's been good to me. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, may he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours. Now, if you are dating in the 21st century, suppose you go to a church event and you look across the room and see the most handsome man you've ever laid eyes on, and he is working the live stream computer. And you go, wow, I like the look of him. And you go and tell someone about him. And their response to you, oh, yeah, that guy, yeah, he's a close relative of ours. Now, that's not good news in the 21st century when you're looking for a partner. You want to be as far genetically as possible, not a close relative. What's happening here is, again, another system that God has ordained, and we're going to go into it further. But when they say, this man is a close relative of ours, the readers are understanding, okay, that's good news. God had determined a system where if someone was widowed, family members would step in to marry her to take care of her, and so that the family line can also continue. Weird for us to think. It's like if your brother passes away, you've got to marry his wife. Weird for us, but this is what they did. And she says, that man is a close relative of ours and is one of our redeemers. Some of your translations might say he is a kinsman redeemer. We'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young woman, lest in another field you be assaulted. She's saying, stick with this guy. So she kept close to the young woman of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young woman you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. So winnowing barley is like when it's windy, which is probably why they do it at night when it's a bit colder and windier. You just kind of throw it all up, and the wind will take all the chaff, take all the stuff that you don't want, and all the things, the grain that you want to keep falls back down. So that's what's happening. He's winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself. Put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. So this is some wise advice from her mother-in-law saying, put on your favorite dress, get your hair done, get your nails done, and go down there. Let him know you're around once he's finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, verse 4, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, all that you say I will do. So she went down to the threshing floor, just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, this isn't a book about marriage, but I feel like there's some good advice there about how to relate to husbands. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, who are you? And she answered, I'm Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Okay, weird situation. If you meet that lovely guy at the church event, and he's not a close relative, and so you want to get married to him, this is not how we go about that in the 21st century. Don't go find out his address, break into his house, uncover the feet. You're going to prison. What's happening is he's probably sleeping there because it's security, right? People come and steal their grains and stuff, so you sleep there. And basically, what is happening here is this is a sign from Ruth of, hey, you're a close relative, and so in God's design and how our culture relates, you're one of the people, you're a kinsman redeemer. You're one of the people who's in line to actually rescue us from our perilous situation. And so to uncover the feet was a symbol of humility, and really it was kind of like a marriage proposal. It was the Ruth getting low, saying like, I'm at your mercy. You are one of our redeemers. Would you please redeem us? Would you please marry me so that we can be redeemed? And, people often speculate, is there something untoward going on here? And we have no reason to believe that. Actually, the text gives us reason to believe that everything was done properly. Because all this time, we've just been given reasons to think, okay, Ruth is a virtuous woman. Boaz is a virtuous man. So this is what's happening here. And he said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich, poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer. I am in line, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before anyone could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. He's just, I guess, trying to protect her honor. And he said, bring the garment that you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, How did your date go? Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, these 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, you must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law. She replied, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. Now, Boaz had gone up to the gate. The gate is where they kind of did all these legal things, and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken, doesn't even get a name, came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down here. So they all sat down, and he said to the Redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, she's selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I'm next in line. I come after you. And the guy said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll redeem it. And then Boaz said, the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, by the way, footnote, asterisk, fine print, you also require Ruth. Not just Ruth, but you acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption for yourself. I can't do it. Now, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging to confirm a transaction. The one drew off his sandal, gave it to the other, and this was the manner of attesting in Israel. So people made covenants, and today you and I, we might sign a contract. I think that's about it. There's probably no other way, or shake on it. But there were different ways of making oaths or making promises and covenants back in the day. So swapping sandals was one of them, and that was apparently because it's kind of like to do with the land that you are standing on. It's like we've made an agreement over that. So here's another one was a salt covenant. So where you've got your pouch of salt and I've got my pouch of salt, and we're going to mix some of our salt together to kind of say that salt is a preservative. So it's kind of meant to be like ongoing, and also there's a sense of permanence to this contract because I can't go in your pouch and bring back my pieces of salt and so on. So that was one of them. There was animal kind of blood sacrifices where you'd chop up animals and walk through it and do all that kind of stuff. There's a bread one where you sat down for a meal. Exodus talks about that. So there were all kinds of covenants, and this was one of them. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off a sandal. Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you're witnesses to this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Also Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have brought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brothers, from the gate of his native place. You are witnesses this day. It's kind of like you all saw it. This is for real. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, this is the mother-in-law, remember, not to Ruth, to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. And may his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. And the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name. Interesting, eh? It's not how we kind of name our kids these days. The woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon. Boaz, Obed, Jesse, David. So this story kind of ends with a happily ever after. And that's why, today's message, the series, is really called Bitterness to Blessedness, because the story started with death and it ends with a birth. It started with a famine and it ends with a feast. It started with a funeral and it ends with babies. So, when we read any given text, I think there are two questions we have to ask. If you could put that slide up, please. What I'm trying to say is, okay, so we've read through this story of Ruth. What are we to take away today? What does God want to say to us? Well, whenever I think about what is God trying to say through a text, these are the two questions I think are important to ask. What does this text say about God, and why is it in the Bible? It's important to ask, what does the text say about God? Because the Bible is, the Bible is written for many different reasons, I suppose. In one large part, it's to record history and tell us what happened and how this ended up here and these people went here and did that. Yeah, cool. It gives us a historical account. In another sense, it gives us a how-to for human flourishing. We should live like this. Do this. If you do this, it'll go well. Avoid drunkenness. That'll be good. Don't kill people. It tells us how to flourish as human beings. But ultimately, we don't have the Bible just as a history book. We don't have the Bible as a how-to for moral living, as good as those two things are. But the Bible is God's revelation of himself to us. We know who God is because he has revealed himself. We don't have to imagine it. We don't have to make it up. Like, God's revealed himself to us in this book. And that's why the goal of the preacher in any given week when we stand up here is to tell the congregation, this is who God is. This is what God is like. The goal of the preacher is to point people to God, that whenever we open this book, we're hearing from God, we're meeting with God. And so it's not about the preacher talking about how they're great or anything like that, because what is our only hope in life and death? That we are not our own, but that we belong to God. Right? And so when you get a call, or when you're at the hospital and the doctor tells you you have 10 weeks to live, what is your only hope in life and death? Well, when you come to a crisis and you have 10 weeks to live, Andrew is a really good preacher. That's not going to give us any hope. Mark is so handsome. That's not going to give us any hope. Han, he scored a lot of goals last week. It's not about the preacher. That's why we open this book to tell you about God and who God is, because he is our only hope in life and in death. And so we have to ask, when we read a text, yes, it might be about us doing this. Yes, it might be giving us history, but ultimately, what is it saying about God? Second thing is we got to ask, why is this in the Bible? This wasn't compiled accidentally. When the authors wrote or spoke of these things, it didn't just happen accidentally. Why did the author include this? And you'll see this predominantly, very prominently, like in the Gospels. Why did they record Jesus doing this? Bible, John will tell us, Jesus did heaps of other stuff, but here are the things that we've recorded in this order to highlight these things. It's all done purposefully. So we've got to ask, why is this in the Bible? Well, I think the point of today's message, as we answer these two questions, I think is this. What does this say about God, and why is this in the Bible? Well, I think it's to teach people and let people know about the providential care of God. That God is a God who cares for his people and looks after his people, even when situations look terrible, and that he is working in the background and in ordinary circumstances and situations, faithfully looking after his people. If you could go to the next slide, please. I think, when we think about, providence, we like to think about miracles, and we want God to act in miracles. And a miracle is when God will just kind of step into the natural world to do something supernatural, right? And that's cool, that's great if those kind of things happen. But, as Pastor Andrew talked a couple of weeks ago, excuse me, there's how God is working through his sovereign providence, that is through ordinary means, to bring about his purposes and to take care of his people. Actually, the word providence itself, before, video, to see. So providence means like that God has seen before how the world and our lives turn out. So it's this idea of like, actually God knows what's going to happen. He's ordained the details of our lives to make sure that his people are going to be okay, that he's going to be glorified, and that his sovereign and wise goodwill will be played out. So when we think about Ruth and think about, okay, this is communicating that our God is a God of providence who takes care of his people, is working in the background. Actually, the narrator never mentions God once. So it's this idea of like, actually, God's working in the background. It's the same as the book of Esther that doesn't even mention God once at all. And the idea is, what we constantly see is like, oh, and she just happened to be at this field. Oh, it just happened to be during this time, and so on. And God's working in the details to look after his people. And I think it's at two levels. Number one is at a national level, right? Because Judges ends with, hey, we're kind of stuffed. We need a leader. Like, what's going to happen to us? And the book of Judges tells us, oh, you need a king? Here's how you got the king, King David. It came through Ruth, this line, this lineage. And so to the faithful Jew hearing or reading it back then, they're going, oh, okay, like God took care of his people in a corporate sense. What we're going to see in the New Testament is it's not just about God providing a king for his people, but the genealogies that we read in the New Testament in Matthew is going to tell us that through that line, God was providing the greater king, the King of Kings, Jesus himself. But not only is God looking after and caring for his people at a national level, but also this story tells us that God is working in the details and caring for his people at a personal level, right? Because all these stories, all these things that it's talking about with Ruth and Naomi and all the coincidences that happen to take place, and that actually God's been working in those details and to even take care of their well-being, their food, and all this kind of thing. This is who God is. That's what the story, this account of Ruth is telling us, that this is who God is. I'd like to invite the band up as we close, and I just want to read from Romans chapter 8. I want to read this because, as we consider Ruth and consider like, okay, the God who loves his people and takes care of his people and is working in the background, I just think these words sum it up so very well. And so, would you please stand, actually? Would you stand as we prepare our hearts to sing and listen to these wonderful words? This is who God is. This is who God is, from Romans chapter 8. What shall we say to these things? All these things about God's love. If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all. If he's done that, how will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Who shall bring any ultimate charge against God's elect? It's God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Christ Jesus is the one who died. More than that, who was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who is indeed interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we're being killed all the day long, we're regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. Even in that scenario, no, in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord.